Yo, Shortbox Nation, this is Botter, and I'm here to tell you right now that con season starts early this year with the return of Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and sci-fi event, Collective Con. That's right, Northeast Florida's largest pop culture convention returns for its 10th year on March 8th through the 10th at the Prime Osborne Center in Jacksonville, Florida. 10 years of Collective Con, they're pulling all the stops out to make sure this is a can't-miss event. And the guest list they got going, don't even get me started on the guest list. I mean, they've got A-list celebrity guests and voice actors from some of your favorite movies, anime, and video games like Elijah Wood and Sean Ashton, Ray Park, Trisha Helfer, Ross Marquand, Max Middleman, and Bo-Katan herself will be there, Katie Sackhoff. Tell me what other convention is giving you the opportunity to meet Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, Darth Maul, and One Punch Man all under the same roof. Only at Collective Con. And if you're looking to get some of your favorite comics signed, or if you want to get an original sketch from some of the best comic artists in the world, well, you're in luck, because there'll be plenty of comic and creator guests there, like DC comic artist extraordinaire Clay Mann, Harvey Award-nominated illustrator John Taylor Christopher, Marvel and DC cover artist Chris Stevens, and acclaimed Star Wars author Timothy Zahn. They'll all be at Collective Con this year. And if you're looking to bring the family, or if you want to make a weekend out of it, you're in luck, because there'll be so much going on at Collective Con that weekend in the form of vendors, fan panels, video game tournaments, cosplay contests, after parties, and a bunch of fan events. You can purchase single and 3-day weekend passes now using the link in this episode's show notes, or by going to collectivecon.com to book your tickets and hotel. Buy your tickets now, and I'll see you at Collective Con, March 8th through the 10th. Now let's start the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Shortbox, Season 6, yeah.
Yo, Shortbox Nation. Welcome back. This is episode 282. I'm your host, Botter Milligan. And of course, a friendly hello to all of you new listeners joining us for the first time. It's nice to have you tuning in today. This episode is sponsored by Gotham City Limit, your one-stop shop for all things comics, located at 4145 Southside Boulevard for all you listeners residing here in Jacksonville. Gotham City Limit will have copies of Thomas Tenney's variant cover of Forceworks number 2 available Wednesday, March 25th, and hopefully have Thomas Tenney in store for a signing in the near future. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and look out for one another, Shortbox Nation. And before I introduce Thomas, I want to thank all the listeners who submitted emails last week. We'll read those in our next episode when we get the crew back together for our Frank Frazetta Artist Spotlight episode in early April. Last but not least, in my shout-out stream, a sincere thank you goes out to all of our Shortbox patrons for their contributions. This show would not be possible without your support. We appreciate your help in keeping the lights on here at Shortbox Studios. And for our new friends joining us today, if you're interested in access to bonus episodes, unreleased interviews, and merchandise, visit patreon.com/theshortbox for more information on becoming a Shortbox patron. Now that the updates are out of the way, how about we get to the main reason why you're all tuning in today? Shortbox listeners, I am very excited to introduce our guest, Thomas Tenney, a well-established comic book artist who has a professional track record that spans across your favorite comic book companies like Marvel, DC, and Image, working on titles like West Coast Avengers, Forceworks, Legion, DC Showcase, Youngblood, and more. He's also worked on comic adaptations based on popular sci-fi franchises like Robotech and Terminator, and contributed artwork for AC/DC. And let's not forget that he's currently attached to Shudder's Creepshow TV series. I could go on about his accolades, but I think this is a good moment as any to say, hi, Thomas. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thomas, how is an established comic artist like yourself been staying busy lately?
Well, everything's kind of confusing at this time, but at the same time, I've got a lot of irons in the fire. I'm currently in the initial stages of working on a project with a Hollywood director. Can't talk about it yet, but we're getting stuff done, character sheets done, and everything like that. It's been keeping me very busy. So
I bet.
It's a good thing.
Here at the Shortbox, we love exclusives and subtle hints, too, so thank you for that.
Yeah, this one I think a lot of fans will get a real big kick out of. This is something that's we've been discussing for a little bit, but I'm glad it's finally coming together.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it. So as I mentioned in the intro, there's a variant cover of Forceworks number 2 featuring your artwork coming out this Wednesday. For those of our listeners that maybe are not up to date, Forceworks is a series that you personally had a hand in creating when it made its debut in the July of 1994, along with writers Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, and of course, inker Ray Garcia. What was your reaction when you learned Marvel was relaunching the series? And I mean, how does it feel to be contributing a new cover to the same comic you helped launch almost 16 years ago?
Oh, yeah. Last year was our 25th anniversary of the release of Forceworks.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of interesting because I had just gone down to the big horror convention down in Tampa of Spooky Empire and talking about Creepshow, and Creepshow was on Shudder. And I found out about here's Forceworks coming back with a Forceworks 2020. So I reached out just to let the guys at Marvel know I was really excited about it. I'm glad to see it was coming back. And next thing I know is I'm talking to Ricky Purden and Darren Shan about doing a cover for the book. And I was like, this is great. And Darren's such a good editor. He was like, look, go ahead and do what you want. You want to do new team, old team? What do you want to do? And I was like, I got to do an homage to the old team.
Hell yeah.
So that was really fun to do that. So it's been great. And Marvel's been really good about stuff. I love working with Marvel again. It's always interesting to see how things change over the years.
And I had a question regarding, especially you having worked for Marvel prior to its purchase by Disney and now doing business with them recently. I mean, what's some of the differences regarding the process for doing work as an artist?
Well, back in the day, of course, we always did things traditionally. It was FedEx on your door, hurry up and get them out there and send them out, the pages out as quick as possible as soon as you knock them out. And everything's such, it's the electronic age, so everything is digital. And I still work traditional. So it's like I'm working and stuff, and I'm scanning it, and I'm trying to get it done and sending it to them. And it's like it's a quicker process to get everything done. I think the whole thing about it is with the colors, keeping in mind now we got such different ways to do colors than we had back then. You always have to keep that in mind. And one thing about Forceworks was the detail was important to me about Forceworks. So you got to give a little more room for the colors to shine now than I think back then.
Speaking about, the details, I was going back through some those issues. Luckily, they're on the Marvel Unlimited app. And man, you crammed a lot of just imagery. There was no, room for. I mean, man, you filled the panels out. I mean, you really, I felt like you put your heart and soul into it, and you made it a comic book of value, in my opinion. I mean, the amount of things that just caught my eyes flipping through some of these issues, man.
It was, at first when we had done the ash can, it was a question of how we would do it. Because the ash can was a different kind of look. We were trying to feel out if it was going to be more traditional, kind of, an more open style. And I had thought to myself, this book's got to be different. After talking to Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, they had such a focused perspective, and they were so focused on this book that we wanted to create something different. And then I went back to my influences of Gene Colan and Felipe Druillet, and I thought, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go with this European style that I enjoy so much, and I just kept going with the details, putting in little plushies there in the back. There was little things that people were like 25 years later going, I didn't notice there was an Iron Man plushie sitting on a cushion back there. And I was like, yeah, there's little things in there. But it was just a question of keeping the readers interested in every panel. We just wanted it grittier than the Avengers had been. And that was our whole thing. And that meant giving the art a certain kind of look. I just felt for this book, we had to break away from tradition.
And I think you definitely executed that well. Because, I mean, flipping through it, I mean, this is a very grimace looking Iron Man. And I love the way you portrayed, like, Spider-Woman. I forgot what cover it was, but there's one where, her costume is, like, tattered. And she's, like, in this really badass action pose on the cover.
Yeah, well, it was like trying to get Iron Man to be, because I had worked on Robotech, which was anime, and I kept thinking about how the animation artists were doing that style with the glare and the tones and the metal, and I wanted to do that with Iron Man because Iron Man had to have that shine to him, and I just thought, let's throw a little bit of this kind of anime shine to Iron Man and take him out of that traditional look for a second. and see what it looks like. And that was how that started to go. And then Nell Yomtoff, our editor, had sat down, and we were trying to figure out what to do with the inking on it. And Ray Garcia had come from a different world of it. It was kind of like Alfredo Alcalde kind of inking, Ernie Chan kind of style. And I was doing this real, believe it be, Juliet style, which is all about high-defined detail. So it was like we had to blend. And when they flew me out to New York for New York City Comic Con, and they had me sit down with Ray, and me and Ray would sit there, and I was like, okay, I'm going to draw this. This is how I would suggest you try inking this. And it was a different world blending our two styles together. It was a good call.
So, I mean, on the topic of, the original series that you worked on and the artwork, what's one that probably has the most meaning to you out of those, first 4 or 5 issues? I mean, whether it's for sentimental reasons or a personal favorite.
It was the cover of the Forceworks #1. The reason that was so interesting is because when we had laid it out, it was just basically Nell was very good with the team. Nell has always been very good. And Nell Yomtoff was like, just give me something let's just make it double. Let's just make this double thing, and we're going to do a pop-up. And I was like, how are we going to do a pop-up? and he's like, well, we're just going to do a pop-up. And I was like, oh, boy. And he's like, this is going to be interesting. So even Nell was like, how the heck are we going to pull this off? Yeah. So I did the cover, and then I had to do the pop-up. But Andy Lanning, which a lot of people didn't know, it wasn't Ray Garcia who inked the pop-up. It was Andy Lanning that inked the actual pop-up art.
Huh.
So we had to actually get special paper because it was huge, because it had to be die cut and everything, so it wasn't normal on comic board because of the way it had to be designed. But Andy Lanning didn't get credit for that, I don't think, but he was the inker on the pop-up part of it. And Andy's a very, very talented inker, so it was great for him to have a part in just that alone. But the cover stood out as important, and years later, Yahoo voted it the 13th best cover of all time. And considering how many comic covers had come before that for Forceworks #1 to fall into that, I was like, oh, well, that's impressive. I didn't even think about it like that. But now, I love that cover.
Hell of an accolade. Cool story, too. So, when you look at your career, and hearing you talk very highly about your relationship with Abnett and Lanning and Garcia, it's safe to assume that you've been exposed to a number of comic making styles, from like the Marvel style of things, DC's process, and of course Image's way of producing comic books. What's been your preferred method? Do you have a favorite way of approaching comic books or any of those styles?
Well, the thing about it with comics was, I had been able to switch gears so many times from the anime style with Robotech and stuff like that. So it was all about blending, but I'd always loved like that 2000 AD art and a lot of that European stock. Mm-hmm. So it was a question of, when I got to DC, I had known Archie Goodwin, and working with Archie was great because Archie Goodwin was such a good teacher. Not only that, he was very open to trying new things. So when we started doing the Fate comic, and Archie and I were working on the Fate comic, but at the same time, I was doing Forceworks, so I was working for DC and Marvel at the same time. So it was a question of, how do I keep Fate from not looking like Forceworks, but still keeping the style, without looking too varied? But it came down to deadlines, because Forceworks was to get that much detail in Forceworks was very difficult to keep it going, because I know Ray wanted to kill me a million times. It's like, why? Why are you doing this?
My hand's cramping, dude. Come on.
It was like, just get it done. And so it was, and Nell was definitely making sure I was staying on task. He was like, stay on point. And I'll never forget Nell telling me, he goes, I am chaining to that table with a dim light bulb, and you are not getting any sleep. Say goodbye to any free time you have. And when I started doing all that detail, he was like, when do you sleep?
Never, man.
But it was like then at the time when we gotten into the initial parts of doing Fate, I had designed the character for Fate when they changed him over, and I had sent it to Archie, and I had so much going, and they were like, it was a question of Archie and and Nell, and I was like, I had to make a decision of what to do: stick with going with bait and Forceworks and juggling it, or concentrate on Forceworks. So, my first commitment was to Marvel, because they called me. I got hired at Marvel in DC 15 minutes apart.
Wow. How does one
Marvel
how that happen?
and said, "You want a job?" It was actually, I was actually also talking to Bob Harris to do a mutant title, one of the X titles. But then Nell was like, "This is going to be a number one." So I was like, "Okay, you got me on that right there." So I basically had to keep concentrating on what style I was going to stick with. But now I figured I'm rolling the dice. I'm going to take the heat either way. If people love this style, fine. If they don't, fine. I'm just going to go ahead and roll the dice with it. Same thing Gene Colan did.
And I guess, kind of sticking to this timeline or this time frame, who were some of the comic artists that inspired you around this time? And how did you go about, I guess, differentiating yourself from some of your contemporaries at the time?
Well, I think it was when Gene Colan, I had spoken with Gene, and Gene had told me, he said, people didn't really care what I was doing. There was people that didn't like what Gene was doing at the time, because Gene had a very fluid style, and it wasn't traditional. And that was a lot of influence on me, because Gene had broke the mold in many ways. Because, back when Gene was hired, they were like, "Can you draw like Kirby?" He was like, "No, you want Kirby? Hire Kirby. You got Kirby. You want George Tuska? Hire them. This is me." And so I kind of went into it with that same mindset that Gene had put into me. He had programmed me with that. Just be yourself. And, don't be like everybody else, because nobody remembers the other guys. You got to be like yourself, good or bad. They hate you, they'll still be talking about you years later. So just go ahead and do it.
That is true as ever. And okay, well, that is some solid advice. And how did Gene Colan come into your life?
Well, it was in 1988. I went to a show in Dallas, and it was at the end of Robotech. And the same show I met Len Wein at, and but there was no artist alley at the time, really. We just had tables, and they were like, pick a seat and sit there and let everybody know who you are, really. And Gene had, I went to the end of this row, and I sat down, and I was sitting there just getting stuff out of my art case and laying stuff out on the table. And so he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Can you just move over just one seat so we can give a little more room for my husband?" It was, and I looked over, and it was this very nice lady, and she was like, okay. I was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." Moved over, and then this older gentleman sat down next to me and started pulling stuff out and putting it on the table, and I looked over, and I was like, "Boy, he looks familiar." And he turned around and smiled at me and said, "I'm Gene Colan," and started shaking my hand. And he goes, "What do you got there?" And started grabbing my stuff off the table. And he's like, "Oh, I like this, I like that." He goes, "Here, look at my pencils." I was like, "What am I going to see? It's Gene Colan's pencils."
Yeah, you're a legend, dude. Yeah.
So Gene and I had our relationship started just right there, because all fans would come by, Gene would sign some comics and say hello, and they'd go off, and then Gene would get right back to the conversation of storytelling and lighting. And he was Gene was an incredible guy, because I miss him, because Gene was a very good guy. He, there's a lot of guys that did take. I was a guy who just came off of doing an anime book, and no one had seen my traditional stuff so much. So to have a guy like Gene Colan pull you under his wing and say, "Look, here's how you do it, and this is what you need to do." And not only just the art, Gene would sit there and talk to me about the business and how to navigate in the business. And he'd talk about appearances and what to say and how to conduct yourself as a professional. And so Gene was like, he cared so much about the industry and being a professional and always being a professional. That was very important to Gene. So, and when I drew Iron Man for the first time, working on an issue of Iron Man, it was like, "Gene, I'm doing the Iron Man." He was like, "Okay, I figured you would." That was very cool to hear. So. But yeah, Gene was very important to me, and our friendship just grew from there. So, there's not enough good words I can say for Gene.
I mean, I really wanted to make sure that I had a chance to hear your thoughts on Gene Colan because, during my research and going on your social media, I could definitely tell that he played a large role. I mean, you've posted about him several times and what he's meant to you. So it's really cool to hear the full story and hear you speak about him in such a great light. Yo, this is Botter. Sorry for interrupting this episode, but I'll keep it brief. I wanted to let you know about a massive sale we have going on over at the Shortbox store on all of our merchandise and apparel. That's theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com. You can now save 20% off your entire order using the discount code YOO, Y-O-O. So if you've been waiting for the right time to finally buy that gauntlet snapback, or if you ever wanted to buy any of the shirts you see me wear on the podcast, well, now's your chance to get them for a steal. We still have a few sizes left of everything, but they won't last long, and once they're gone, they are gone. And then I mentioned that all of our apparel is screen printed on high quality material. None of that heat transfer or direct to garment stuff. Our shirts are some of the most comfortable ones you'll ever wear, and the hats look even better in person. So wear your support for the Shortbox Nation proudly, knowing that you're going to look damn good doing it. Get to theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com as soon as you can, and don't forget to use that discount code YOO, Y-O-O, to save 20% off your entire order. All of this information can be found in this episode's show notes if you want to get there faster. Thanks for not pressing fast forward. Now back to the show.
Yeah, Gene was an important figure, I think, in comics, and I think he was overshadowed some. But I think fans now have been appreciating his stuff and seeing what Gene meant, and just looking at his storytelling and the detail Gene had. His pencils they were amazing to me. Just to hold them in my hands at times, and Gene would just draw something real quick, and Gene would say, like, look at this room and now think of it in black and white, and look at the shadows and see how the shadows play from. It was just little things like that Gene would teach you that you don't learn. Thank goodness for Joe Kubert's school. I think Joe Kubert's school has been very good in helping people to learn basics, because a lot of people seem like, well, I can just draw this, and it's not that easy.
Well said. And speaking about like artists and just kind of comic book professionals that not only are some of my personal favorites like Gene Colan, but you've worked directly with one of my favorite pair of writers in the comic book industry, Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. I mean, what was it like working with them during your time at Forceworks?
Dan and Andy were great. They kept me busy, and they would give me ideas of what they wanted certain characters to look like, or they had an idea in them. Mm-hmm. And here was the funny thing. We had gotten to, I forget which issue it was, 2 or 3, and it was supposed to take place in Manhattan. And I was like, guys, I'm going to have to run to the library. There was no internet. I have to run to the library and get pictures of New York to draw all these specific locations. And they were like, yeah, let's see. So they were like, where are you at now? And I was in Texas, and they were like, well, just draw what you see around there. We'll write around it. So that's how good they are about. Dan and Andy were always good about working with you to get the story going, and they knew how to pace it, and they would compliment. They always open. We would always talk on the phone, even though they were in the UK, and it would cost me a ton of money in phone calls.
I didn't know they were in the UK. Wow.
Yeah. So it was weird. We'd be talking, and it's like I'd get my phone bill, and I was like, "Hey, now can we get this covered?"
Yeah. Can I write this off as an expense?
It's like I definitely. Why are you talking so long? Just get it done.
Yeah. So I mean, do you still stay in touch, or did you end up keeping up with their work as they progressed through Marvel? Because for me, their name, I tie it to, the Annihilation series and the things they did for all of the space themed characters in Marvel, like Nova and Guardians of the Galaxy. They definitely have a big place in my catalog of great writers. Did you end up following their work as they progressed?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because, Nell Yomtov, he knew he had something special in him, too. Nell would always sing their praises, and Nell was on point with Dan and Andy. He knew these guys were destined for greatness, in comics.
That's a good call.
And they were. And I could tell just talking to them, the brilliance of talking to Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. You could just sense their brilliance. And they knew what they wanted, and they had such a good way of composing a story. They were real maestros of comic book storytelling.
Well said. Absolutely agree. So with your variant for issue 2 for this current Forceworks series coming out this Wednesday, and the possibility of you being at Gotham City and then doing signings there, hopefully in the near future. I wanted to talk about your pull list. I mean, are you collecting any current comics that are out today?
I'm always going to be the thing about the new comics is it's so hard to keep up with because everything's always changing.
Yeah, they are.
And
yeah, they are.
It's so quick. I'm so used to having teams last, a year, 2 years, and it's such a revolving door on it. It's hard to keep up with the stories now. So as much as I try to keep up with them, I'm always going back and looking back at the old stuff. So it's like, I know I sound like a dinosaur with that, but I'm always going back and being amazed by reading some of the stuff that Alan Moore wrote. But today there's a lot of good talent out there. I just always look at it and I think to myself, where is this going to go? And then all of a sudden, next thing we know, where are we going with this? It's changing. It's like, please. But Matthew Rosenberg, who writes the Forceworks 2020, is a very talented writer.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
And I love what he did with Forceworks. He's an amazing writer.
So I want to keep with the subject of your most recent work. You've also had a big part in creating artwork for Shudder's recent Creepshow TV series. How close did you get to work with the well-respected Greg Nicotero on and his team?
Well, the good thing about it, how it came about real quick is that I had worked with Brian Whitten at Image.
Wow.
And Brian was the writer on the Chapel series that I did the art for, and Brian and I became friends way back then in the mid-'90s. And I knew Brian was one of those guys. Brian's one of those guys that you knew talking to him on the phone. It was like his passion for the industry was there, for the entertainment industry. And when we talked about stuff, and we talked about the art and all this stuff. And then Brian had said to me that we had talked about Creepshow, and Brian working with Greg Nicotero on Creepshow. And I was like, wow, I love Creepshow, the movie. Then he was like, well, keep that thought in mind. So
I got something lined up for you, buddy.
Yeah, next thing I know is Brian's extending an invitation to take part in it.
Wow.
And I was really excited because not only doing Creepshow, because I love the film and working with Greg, but it's also working with Brian because he's my friend. And Brian it's like working with a genius, and you can sense it. So he was always a positive influence. Brian's a very positive influence in the entertainment industry. So working on it was great. And then I'd do stuff. They'd send me stuff, and I'd start drawing stuff for the show. And I didn't want to just draw it. I just draw it one time, a panel at a time sometimes, and send it to Brian and get him and Greg's input on it. Because we were staying to the retro roots of the EC comic roots and stuff like that. And the original roots of Creepshow. Greg is amazing. Working with Greg is amazing. It's just like you can just sit back and just watch his brilliance at work. It's crazy.
I'm seeing a really good trend that you've had in your career, and that seems to be very important role models, or just, and in your own words, just brilliance. Running into that, between Archie Goodwin, Gene Colan, and Brian as well. I mean, it sounds like you've been surrounded by really good just talent and teachers and instructors and just people that you can kind of feed off of.
Yeah, I think some of the guys that I didn't get a chance to work with that were influences were Sergio Aragones, who spent, I forget how many hours we spent at dinner, and Sergio would tell me stories, and Len Wein was amazing. Bob Burden I spoke with. There's a lot of guys I spoke to. John Romita Sr. was the first guy really in the comic industry that I got to work with, to talk to. John Romita Sr. was the first one to actually take interest in me.
Wow.
And then Terry Austin.
Wow. Talk about a cosign. That is a major cosign when it comes to like comic book legends.
Yeah, what had happened is was in rock bands as a teenager. Growing up, I got into rock bands and rock music and drawing stages and stuff like that. Album covers for my bands. And a friend of mine had said, can you draw like Iron Man for me one time? I did. And he was like, well, that's great. And a friend of mine gave me the Marvel tryout book.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And I had never drawn this stuff before. Never. So I said, there was a penciling and inking section, and I submitted both just for the heck of it. And the next thing I knew, I got a letter for the penciling. You're one of the top 3 finalists. And then I was like, wow, that's amazing. I never drew this. And then I get another letter. You're the top 3 finalists for the inking. I was like, uh-oh, what the heck am I doing here? And then the next thing I know, I'm talking to John Romita Sr. So it progressed like that quickly.
Wow. Yeah. I'm thinking, especially doing the research and then you just bringing up Chapel. I wanted to say, I was definitely, I came across your work at a very young age. I remember going through my dad's boxes of comics, and this is when I was first getting into comic books. Our household was a Marvel household at its finest. But my dad had a few a few comics of just various, from Image, some from DC, but it was 98% Marvel. But one of the few books he had from Image was Chapel. And I remember flipping through it and being really impressed by the art. But I mean, I was a Marvel head. I was like, who is this guy? This is not a real superhero. This isn't a Marvel guy. So it's kind of funny now to look back and while I was doing research, and I was like, wait a minute, Thomas Tenney did Chapel? Like, that's got a special place in my heart.
I went right from Forceworks. I got to this point of Forceworks, and then it was I had the invite from Rob Layfield's Extreme Studios to join them. So it was like, and they were like, well, we're going to keep you busy, but we got Chapel in mind. We're going to get to Chapel. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be doing Chapel. And so they were throwing me Youngblood stuff to keep me busy until we did Chapel. And then I worked with Eric Stevenson and Brian. That's where I met Brian Winton. So it was like, it was interesting to do that. But it was a different, you get into that Marvel mode, and you're used to how Marvel does things. And it was a totally different atmosphere at Image, because it was more about, it was a lot of free range. Marvel run a tight ship, and where Image was more like, we're trusting you to do this. So they gave you, they were like, it was switching a lot of modes. But I went back to Marvel, which a lot of people didn't know is after I got through working on stuff with Image, Marvel invited me back. So I ended up going to Marvel again because they were doing a rock line of comics with AC/DC. Wow, okay. So that's how I went right back to Marvel. And people didn't even realize it because the AC/DC comic and the rock line never made it out.
Well, you did have, you did do some work for the, I think, what was it? I know it was the Ball Breaker album, so the 13th album, and you did work for, I think 2 of your artwork show up in the CD booklet, correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So
before we had done that, I had to complete the first issue of the AC/DC comic.
Okay. And you said that never came out.
That never came out, but it was an interesting story, and we had this whole interesting story, and it was great. And I drew the first issue of the AC/DC comic, and it was going to come out from Marvel, and nobody knows exactly the story what happened. It was either an argument over money or rights, or who knows. What stopped the book after it had already been done. The initial pencils were done for it, and the next thing I know is they're talking about me working for the band. And I was like, okay, we want you to work for the band. And then I was talking to Marvel at the same time I was talking to East West. Wow. So I was like, okay, who am I working for here? So you're working for both. You're working for the band and you're working for Marvel. I'm like, okay, so who gets credit? We don't know. Just do it. That's how it ended up going that way.
And I've read and heard similar stories when it came to like Marvel's licensing at that time, where it was like, if you look now, because it took me a little bit to find exactly like where your artwork was at. I didn't know about the canceled comic, but I think at the time what Marvel was really just licensing, hey, Marvel will contribute the artwork. We're not going to, really credit exactly what artist it is. Luckily, I was able to find a copy of scanned copy of the booklet on Discogs, and I flipped through each page and I saw your artwork. Luckily, like I could tell from your artist signature, but I know that that's not a very uncommon discrepancy that many artists around at that time had to deal with when it came to like the license stuff.
Well, the weird part about it is when I had done the CD cover for Hard as Rock, and when the CD was released, there was a lot of people didn't know there was two copies of it.
Huh.
There was two different copies of it. There was one that said Art by Marvel, and the other was Art by me.
Wow.
And so there was like, people are like, which one's worth more? And I'm like, people ask me that to this day. I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea which one's worth more, but it was because the label was, we hired you, we paid you. So this is, your name goes on it. And then it was like, well, Marvel licensed you. And it was like, so there's two different copies of it out there.
And I mean, so with you being a musician at the, yourself, I mean, what did the opportunity mean to you at the time? And I mean, how did your musical talent, I guess, influence your approach on the project? Did it help any? Was it a little easier to relate?
Oh yeah, a lot easier, because it was something that was where I was planning to go with if I was going to do art, it was going to be that. It was going to be working, Dirk Riggs that kind of doing covers for albums. And that was my idea. That was what, if I was going to do art, that's where I was focused. I wasn't focused on comics. It was art and music. So it was like coming back to what I initially wanted to do. So I was very excited just for the opportunity to work with bands I knew. And it was like, wow, okay, I'm doing this again. So, and it was like I kept meeting people in the music industry, and they're like, draw me this, draw me that, draw me this, draw me that. And I was like, okay, I've got a career in music now.
That is cool. Yeah, and one thing that stands out about your work is the attention to independent artists, and not just in the field of comics, but also independent music acts. I know that you've co-founded 2 music companies that help out independent artists. So I guess my question for you is, what are some common themes or observations you've noticed on both sides of the fence, comic and music? Is there a lot of similarity on how you would recommend a hopeful professional approach to the business side for either or?
It was all about marketing. One thing I got to sit in a lot of meetings with music between big guys, and I learned a lot. And it was about how to market stuff and how to promote yourself. And it was the same thing with comics, because the one thing I learned from music that it was out of my element in comics, because that's always up to the business, was how do you promote yourself and how do you work it? So I kind of used that knowledge that I learned in music with comics, but there was a similarity about how you got, in the music industry, it was like, how many butts can you put in the seats? And in the industry, it was like, how many issues do you sell? So what do we do to make this sell and get people interested? So there was a lot of similarities on that. And I think it was also the similarities of how it was a community. And in the comic industry, there was a community of artists. It was sometimes hard to break into, the groups, because it certainly was delegated into groups of this group of Marvel guys, DC, you're not sitting at this table, you're not sitting at this table. When you're, especially back when. And I think it was also a question of that in the industry. You got your independent bands that were sitting here at the clubs, and then you got your big bands playing these giant venues. But how do you get from this to this? How do you bridge that gap? And I noticed that a lot of guys were using the same process of, you just got to keep putting stuff out there and just put it in the right people's faces and just be determined. And I think a lot of people were like, no, I'm not getting listened to. Well, it's like with the comic industry, you got to be seen. You got to get it seen by the right people. So you just got to be aggressive about it, assertive about it. And so, yeah, there was a lot of similarities in that part.
So when you look at your very extensive career, is there a point that you feel comfortable in saying, or that you felt like, okay, I made it. Like, I am a professional. I do this for a living. I am, to be respected. I am in the industry. I mean, is there a point that you can pick out where you've had that feeling? And a follow-up to that, too, is what advice would you give your younger self in terms of navigating the comic or even the business as a whole?
Well, yeah, I think it was at the time it was. I thought I had made it right off the bat after Robotech because Robotech was a very big selling comic, and people didn't realize that it was like anime wasn't that big at the time. Robotech really ignited the fuse for what you see today, and I think Robotech deserves that credit for igniting the fuse because people were buying anime after Robotech. And I thought, well, great. Came on the tail end of the finishing Robotech, and then here I'm doing Terminator. And Terminator, when I got into the Terminator series, it was falling apart on the series. So they came in and I actually co-wrote issue 2, and people don't know that of Terminator because I wasn't credited with it because we had no writer on issue 2. We had no writer, and it was basically a free-for-all. And I thought, okay, well, I made it here, but then my deadlines were insane. And I'm not going to go over the history of Now Comics, but it was when I got to Marvel, and this was thanks to Rich Rankin. Rich Rankin, my inker from the Robotech days, Kamiko, had done what he could do, and he was the one that said, you're going to go to Marvel. And Rich was the one who took my work to Marvel and said, here, look at this. And it was when I had those 2 phone calls within 15 minutes that I had felt that I had made it.
Wow. Yeah, I'd probably feel the same way too. Wow, from Robotech to Marvel DC.
Yeah, it was a jump. But see, at the same time, people weren't going to take. I thought a lot of people weren't going to take because you can get stereotyped. And doing anime art, I was starting to feel like I was Adam West. You know.
That's not a.
I thought no one's going to give me a role. Yeah. I'm always going to be Batman. So, you know.
But I wanted to say that your Terminator covers, and for anyone interested, if you just type in the Terminator Now comics, they are fantastic. Some of these covers are absolutely awesome.
Yeah, Paul Galassi did some work on the covers, and he did a cover, and Paul's a great artist. He was an incredible artist. But yeah, it was a call by Now to do the painted covers. Mm-hmm. They really were up and down with it about doing the covers, me doing the covers for it, because they were like, well, we got all these artists that want to get involved in Terminator. So I was like, well, we'll give them the covers. I was like, I don't have a problem with that. You know, it's fine with me. It's one less thing I have to worry about right now on this tight deadline.
You mentioned something about the editorial and Forceworks and the cover, first cover, they wanted something big and cool. I feel like those 2 words kind of encapsulate just your style and for the most part, maybe even your career. It just seems that you've been working on big and cool projects and delivering really big and cool visuals.
Well, I've been fortunate. I'll just say that. I've been fortunate that I've tried to surround myself with good people that are passionate about the industry. And that was the main thing for me was I've always felt it was good to be around people that have a drive to excel in the industry and just not just leave their name, but leave a footprint. And I always look for that in people. And that's why I look at the people around me and say, well, what are you doing or what do you think? And to this day, I've been in the comic industry. This is my 35th year being in the comic industry. And still to this day, I talk to my buddies like Tom Morgan and stuff like that, or Steve Lavigny, who did the Turtles, a friend of mine. And I talk to these guys and I ask for their advice or their input. Or Dorian Vallejo, who's Boris Vallejo's son, is a friend of mine. And
oh, wow.
I talk to these guys. I want their influence. I mean, check your ego at the door. And I think that's a good thing for most artists to remember. Check your ego at the door. We're a community. You're never bigger than the art. Art's always going to be bigger than you.
Well said. So I mean, looking at your 35, years of being in the comic industry, what do you miss most about I guess comic culture from when you started or in the prime of its, a peak or whatever, compared to now? And what are you happy that has changed?
What I miss is I think a lot of it has become there was a personal touch back then because there wasn't exchanging text and there was no exchanging. You were talking to each other, and and you could really brainstorm when you were talking to each other. It wasn't so short and brief, and I think that's that personal touch that we're all missing. And I think a lot of guys today don't understand that and I think mentoring has fallen off, and I really wish there was more of it. Back then, there was a lot of guys. I've spoken to Jack Kirby personally, and Stanley, and Frank Miller, and there was always these guys that were taking interest. Even Jack, Jack Kirby, Jack was really nice to me when I was a nobody. And this is Jack Kirby, and I was like, and he took the time to talk to me, and I go, okay, well, I ain't got time for you, kid. He stood there and spoke with me about art and the techniques, and I go to shows now, and it's just that personal touch seems to be missing, and I wish it was there. I do think today the good thing about it is that the conventions are opening up these artist alleys for people, younger artists, to be seen.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's a very, very good thing that these conventions are doing. I know some people say, well, Artist Alley takes away. No, it doesn't. I wish there was Artist Alleys back then. I think there's a lot of talented people that are getting overlooked. And I think the Artist Alley gives them a chance to come out and say, look, I'm pretty darn talented myself. It's hard to be seen with so many people posting stuff on the internet constantly. It's a constant barrage of art. How do you stand out? How do you get yourself recognized? You could be as talented as forever, but how do I get recognized? And it's all about the things that Gene taught me about marketing and how to get seen. And that's important. And I think the biggest thing, Jim Shooter once told me, he said to me, kid, I don't care how talented you are. If you don't know storytelling, if you don't know deadlines, you're not coming to Marvel. You've got to know this stuff. And thank goodness Diana Schutz over and Jerry Giovannico over at Kamiko said to me, hey, kid, we're giving you that shot to learn it. We're going to teach you. And they did. So they took a shot and they taught me. And they were, I was outspoken, and I'm sure I was hard stallion to round up. But so, yeah, I think that's the difference. And that's things like that that kind of stuff is important nowadays.
Do you still participate in like the conventions and that whole circuit?
Oh yeah, I just don't do it as much as I would like to. It's just because I try to get involved. My significant other, Christina, she takes care of this stuff for me. So she keeps me from pushing myself too hard. Because so many years I toured with bands when I was working in music, and it took a toll. It's a lot. It took a toll on me. I really, it was not an easy life. So I sacrificed a lot to be on tour, and I sacrificed a lot of my personal life to be on tour because I had to. And but I have goals, and I want to reach them. So I'm always set on my goals. So it's important for people to always stay focused on a goal, and don't let anybody tell you can't.
Well said.
You can do it. I was a kid from nowhere. Somebody took a chance on me.
That's really inspiring, Thomas, man. Thank you for sharing that. So in addition to, this variant cover Forceworks coming out, your work with Creep Show, I mean, what else are you working with? Is there any personal projects that you're working with or working on?
There's so many. I know there's some stuff I have with some of my celebrity friends I've been speaking with. I can't say who because they wouldn't want me to. But there's stuff like that. I talk to a lot of people that are outside of the comics industry because there's creative sides of the comics that some of the actors I know and some directors I know that want to get into comics. So we talk about what we can do and how we can create things. So there's a lot of talk between me and those guys about let's do something different. Let's do something interesting. Let's try something new. And it's all about creating something new. So I get a lot of stuff thrown at me. I just finished the cover for Tales from Nocturnia with Matt Knowles and Steph Cannon with the band Inferi.
Cool.
And that's a good band. Again, my music goes back to, that's why I liked working with stuff like that, because I worked with a band like Inferior, and they're a good group of talented musicians. And I work with a guy out of Florida named Nick Whitfield, one of the most talented musicians in Florida. And we work on stuff together to get stuff going and come up with new ideas and new creative ways of blending music and art, and I'm always interested in stuff like that. I think we have to be creative now. Yeah. Everything gets stale if it doesn't.
Absolutely. So Thomas, what I normally like to do when it comes to these interviews and reaching the end of the show, I usually leave it up to my guest to share one story that they feel is either their favorite or maybe one they haven't shared before, but I really kind of leave it up to the guest to share just a story that they want to share with our listeners. And and I'm sure with your extensive career and even some of the names that you've dropped, Stan Lee, Frank Miller, Jack Kirby, Gene Colan, Archie Goodwin, Jim Shooter, etc. I'm sure that you've probably got a whole plethora of comic book stories to share. But is there one that you want to go ahead and sign us off with?
Okay, this is one that was really kind of fun and interesting at the same time. This was at a convention, I think it was in '87, and I had met Mike Mignola at the convention. Mike was a great guy, and we were outside in the hallway talking and stuff, and I forget what happened, and Mike went back in or something like that. Anyhow, so I see this massive crowd coming at me. And I'm down the hall, and I didn't know who it was. I didn't know. All I could see was fans. And it almost parted like the Red Sea, and here was Stan Lee. And Stan walks right through the crowd, and he comes over to where I was. We were sitting there, and at the time, I was smoking cigarettes, and Stan had a cigar or something like that in his hand. He's like, is there a way to do this? And I was like, yeah. And then he pulled up in his velvet rope. And he came in, he sat down, and Stan sat down, and he started talking to me. And we're sitting here talking, and I thought, oh, I'm talking to Stan Lee. This is very cool. I'm talking to Stan Lee. And Stan's just like, you got any work on you? I was like, well, right here. And he's like, let me see it. And he pulled out, and Stan just reached into my case and started pulling out work. And Stan started looking at it, and he goes, cool, this is nice, and this is nice. And then he starts talking, and it's Stan. Whatever Stan says, you're just enthralled by it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And finally, one of the guys at the convention comes running up, and he says, we're having a charity auction. He saw Stan there. We're having a charity auction. So is there anything you guys would like to contribute? And Stan, being Stan, was like, oh, definitely. There was nothing around. There was nothing. There was no. I had the person that was with me had taken my art case and brought it back into the dealer's room. So because we were been talking for such a while, and Stan's looking around, and there's an orange in a fruit basket, and Stan picks up the orange and signs it. And I was like, did he just photograph an orange? And he hands it to me. He goes, sign it. And I was like, okay. And he was like, hey, right there, right below my name, sign that. I was like, okay, I'm signing an orange with Stan Lee. And the guys, they volunteer for the show, looking at us like, I guess, like we're crazy. But it was Stan Lee's autograph.
Holy
and so he goes and he takes the orange and goes running back off down the hallway. And I looked at Stan, and Stan looks at me, and I was like, somebody will buy it, Stan. And he's like, I know. And I was like, I don't know, maybe $50. And it's like, no. That thing went for like $500.
Get out of here.
No, I'm not kidding. And years later, what was so funny is that I was shown the orange again. Somebody had preserved it. And I was like, are you kidding me? There's a preserved orange with Stan Lee's signature.
That is, first of all, I think you just set the bar very high for stories being told on this show. 2, I was just about to say, oh, great. Well, now there's some fanboy out there with a rotting orange with Stan and your signature, but I should not be surprised at the level of commitment and dedication from comic book fans and preserving.
Oh yeah, it's preserved. It's like in a block. It was weird. It was like in a clear acetate block or something like that.
Man,
it's like it looked like the Tesseract cube with an orange in it. I'm like, okay, there's an orange.
That's the missing Infinity Gem that Thanos needed right there.
Yeah, and the last thing I remember, I saw Stan a few years back before his passing, and I told Stan about it. And Stan looked at me and he goes, "I kind of figured it," and he just gave me that Stanley smile and he patted me on the shoulder. He goes, "I told you, aren't you glad you signed it now?"
And
he turned around and sat down and I looked at Stan and he gave me a thumbs up with a smile. And that's my last memory of Stan.
Damn, that was beautiful. That was, man, Thomas, thank you for that. That was inspiring and hysterical.
Yeah, Stan, I'll never forget. Anything I go away with, I'll never forget that smile.
Well, I appreciate
that last look with Stan.
I appreciate you sharing that, Thomas. I do, and you know what? I really appreciate you taking the time out today to chat with us and letting our listeners get to hear from you and hear your story and all about the great work that you've done for the comic book industry.
Oh man, it was my pleasure.
With that being said, Thomas, I do want to go and give you real quick a chance to shout out or plug anything you've got going on, any website or any place that you want people to be directed towards.
Well, I'm hoping that people just, right now, instead of a shout-out from me, I want to give a recognition to the local comic shops.
Yes.
During this time of crisis. I want people to remember the comic shops are going to be dealing with a lot right now. So support your local shops and take care of the owners. We'll all get through this, but they need our support, and they need our love, and they need our care. Support your creators. Support your artists. It's going to be a difficult time, so let's look out for each other. That's most important right now.
Well said, Thomas. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and just echo what you said. A lot of, especially local shops here in Jacksonville, are offering curbside pickup. You can give them a call to have them meet you outside. They'll pull comic books still for you. I think a few of them even have online stores that you can place orders and pick up. They're definitely doing their best to be safe and still provide comic books for everyone. So look out for them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, main thing I got to say with everybody is take care right now. Be careful, be smart, be wise, and look out for each other.
Well said.
We're all a community. From here in Jacksonville to Florida, the United States, I've got friends all over the world. And stay safe. Be smart.
Damn right. Fanboys and fangirls unite. And with that being said, Shortbox Nation, that is the end of our episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us today. A big thank you to Thomas Tenney for his time and those awesome stories he shared. Big shout outs to Ben over at Gotham City Limit for inspiring this episode. And of course, thank you to all the Shortbox patrons for your support and contributions. If you're interested in becoming a Shortbox patron yourself in exchange for bonus episodes and merch, well, check us out at patreon.com/theshortbox to see what we have to offer. We're hoping to be back to a regular recording schedule come first week of April. We're planning to do a artist spotlight episode on Frank Frazetta as voted by the Shortbox patrons. In the meantime, follow us across social media at the Shortbox Jack to see what we got going on and stay up to date with everything that we are planning. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and look out for one another. Peace.
Peace.